Hey everyone, it's Tracy Martirana here from Holistic Wellness with Tracy. Welcome back to my channel. If this is the first time you're joining me, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Recently, I picked up this beautiful bunch of rainbow chard from my local farmers. And the first thing I thought of when I saw it was greens and beans. Now, I know most of you are going to say greens and beans are made with escarole, not chard, but I'm here to tell you that you can make greens and beans with any green within reason. Come join me. I'll show you how to make this very simple, easy, but delicious soup. I'm going to start with my soup pot, just getting a little olive oil in the bottom, letting that heat up while I chop up some onion. This happens to be a Vidalia onion, but you can use whatever type of onion you have. It's a pretty big sized onion as well, so I'm just going to use half. I'm stirring these around, and then I'm just going to cook them until they begin to soften a little bit. You want to make sure your heat is not too high. We don't want to burn the onions. So I'm going to turn it down. And while they're softening, I'm going to prep the greens. So here is my beautiful Swiss chard, the nice rainbow chard, all the different colored stems, which is sad because I'm going to cut quite a bit, well, not all of the stem, but I'm going to cut like the very end where it's sort of thick and might be a little rough. I'm going to cut that off. I still want to keep some of the color, like all of this color up through here, all this veining. That'll be very beautiful, but we don't need the thick ends. And then I want to just kind of cut this up into smaller pieces just to make eating the soup a little bit easier. If you've ever tried to eat greens and beans with a spoon, if the greens aren't cut up, you end up with like this one big giant piece of green. And you're trying to get it all onto your spoon, and it doesn't work out so well. So just chop this up almost like about the size that you would make if you're doing this for a salad. Doesn't have to be perfect. One thing I love about this soup is, for one, you can use any green you have. So I often use chard, but I occasionally will use kale. I've used spinach. Obviously, I've used escarole. You can easily scale it up or down. If you want to make a bigger pot, just grab more greens. And even if you don't have more greens, just using more broth just makes it a little bit more brothier. It comes together really fast. And you can also add things. So while your standard greens and beans is really just like onion, garlic, greens, some broth, and some cannellini beans, I've made it before with some sauteed zucchini. I've added mushrooms. Just when I have extra veggies I need to use up, you can throw them in. Let's check on our onions. They're beginning to soften. I'm going to let them go a few more minutes. If they act like they want to burn, you can obviously turn the temperature down a little bit more, or even just add a little bit of water to this and just allow them to sort of steam. That works too. The onions are looking pretty good, so I'm going to add in the garlic. Garlic burns really easy, and that is why I let the onions get started first. Then I'm just going to peel and mince my garlic. I'm using 3 cloves, but that's because one of these, or actually 2 of these, are really small. I would probably use 2 regular size, maybe even 3 regular size, but this is actually the end of my garlic. Apparently we did a lot more cooking this week than I thought, and we have run out. Every little bit of garlic goodness. And if you don't have fresh garlic, you could add in some garlic powder. Fresh garlic is just much tastier here. Stirring this around, just allowing that garlic to cook just a little bit, again without burning it. I'm going to add a nice sprinkle of salt. I can always salt more later. And then I'm just going to start popping my greens in here. And as I put them in the pot, I know it looks like a lot, but trust me, it is not. This is probably about 3 sort of cups. If I think like a big handful is a cup, about 3 cups. I'm just going to stir it around to let it begin to wilt a little bit. And you can see the size is quickly diminishing as the water begins to come out of the greens. They wilt down in like a quarter of their size when all is said and done. Now I'm just going to add a good cup of water. Stir it around and just let this simmer away while I prepare the beans and the broth. Now I'm just using canned cannellini beans because that is the easiest. And while I think I always use cannellini beans, if you used like a small navy bean or like a great white bean, that would be fine too. These are just, cannellini beans are probably just more traditional. I have 2 cans, and I do something, well, I think it's unusual just because I've never seen another recipe that calls for this, but I started doing it just to make it a little more hearty. I used to use just 1 can of beans, and I would rinse them out, and after everything was cooked down and I'd added the broth, I would add in my can of beans. Well, now I take about half of the beans and I puree them up with a little bit of broth so that it thickens the broth a little bit, adds a little more sustenance to it, a little more protein, makes it yummy. I am not a big user of like gadgety things, but I did pick up this magic bullet a few years ago. I was walking around a store with my daughter and we happened to come across them on sale. So I picked one up thinking maybe it would be useful. And I don't use it a lot. This is an instance where I do. So I'm just going to take the little container, put a little bit of, this is my not chicken broth, my veggie chicken broth. A little bit of broth in there. Just using this as a scoop. It doesn't really matter the amount. I mean, about the equivalent of 1 cup. So about half of the beans. Screw this on. And then it just pops on here. It's going to get loud. A little bit thick, so I'm just going to add a little more broth to it. Again, I'm going to be diluting this in all of the broth eventually anyways, so it doesn't really matter. It'll just make it easier to get out of the little magic bullet container if it's liquidy. There you go. So that is all pureed up. Let's check on our greens. They're just steaming away. You can see what used to be clear water. Some of the color from the chard is sort of coming out into that, coloring it a little bit. And then to this, I'm just going to add the rest of my broth. And my puree. Not the most attractive looking stuff, but, but that's okay. Stir that in. And I'm going to just let this cook for a little while, just allow those greens to cook up and soften just a little bit more. And then typically what I do is about 10-15 minutes before I want to serve it, I add in the beans, let those get nice and warm. I don't like to add them too early because then sometimes they get mushy. So we'll just let this simmer away. So while the greens were cooking along, I cleaned up the kitchen, and now it looks like everything is softening up nicely. Chard is nice and soft, but still fairly green. It will darken up a little bit as it sits. It'll lose that vibrant green color, but it will still be beautiful. It's nice and hot. So I'm going to add in the rest of my cannellini beans. I'm turning off the fire, just letting this sit so those beans can warm through, and then in a few minutes we'll be ready to eat. When it's time to eat, scoop it into a bowl, garnish it with parsley, top it with some grated Parmesan, maybe think about serving it with a nice piece of crusty bread. It makes a light dinner, a delicious lunch. Really, eat it whenever you want. It's tasty, it's easy, and all in all, it came together in less than 30 minutes. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great day.